All
Hey
right.
y'all.
Hey, Emily.
Hi. I'm Emily. Nice to see you.
I'm Christiana, and this is we are here joining together to go over Journey Backwards. Yes, rewriting your story and restoring connection.
Yeah, and welcome to Woven. So this is a space where we explore the deep imprints of our earliest experiences and how they shape the way that we live and love and evolve. And in this space, we unlock the hidden truths that are literally woven in our bodies.
Yeah, it's so cool because we're diving into the layers of our personal narrative, the nervous system, essentially how the body holds memories from our childhood and even beyond, from
Yeah.
our grandparents, their grandparents, like everybody's upbringings is all packed inside of you. Little did you know. And I know some of you who've been listening to the two previous podcasts before, or if you haven't, dive in. It gives you a little bit of a background information about the Flower of Life Foundation and how we journey back without really having access to the memories per se right now in this moment, but we bring them up like in the present just through a mapping process that Emily and I are going to really unpack here for you today. And you've seen a little bit of it if you've watched the previous podcast. So I'm really excited. It'll be
Yes.
fun.
Awesome. So we've both walked this path, or we're at least
Yeah.
involved in it. Yeah, I always say we don't arrive, right? We continue on our journey. So, this self-inquiry, healing, identifying, discovering, curiosity. And we know firsthand how powerful it is and how to in turn, unpack the narratives and identify the shape of our personalities and how we respond to the world, and which is why we want to share it with you, because we found it to be profound and interesting and humbling and magical and exciting, and it's like a missing puzzle piece.
That's a great way of
um
describing it.
yeah, and we've also as practitioners helped other people identify some of those missing puzzle pieces as well. So we're excited to help as many people as we can, on this journey, or this concept of healing our families or healing ourselves, and this modality, or what we have, um, we think is really transformative for folks.
Yeah, it's funny. I know one of the things that you and I are going to highlight today about what we tag the inner child journey, right? The inner child that's in all of us. We've all gone through childhood. How does that still exist in us today? How does it show up in our nervous system and running in the background? I mean, this crazy fact that 95% of what you do during the day, you're not even like consciously aware, or you're not engaged in the present moment. You're just doing it from learning, like from what you've learned and picked up along the way. So it's kind of this journey that you and I are talking about. It's really an awakening, right?
Mhm.
It's an awakening to what made you the way you are and get you to reflect on it so that you can now become more conscious and be like a pilot flying that airplane or driving that Corvette, whatever you want, but not having it on the autopilot. We're not trying to live in the AI robotic transhumanism right here. We're trying to be totally in control of our bodies. And that takes education that we haven't been provided. And you may, whoever's listening to this, you may be like, what? I've had plenty of education, not this kind. And I hear it all the time. I had a client with me last week. She was in so much pain, and when I started listening to her story, she came in for body work, right? And then once we kind of get into the body work, then it's like, okay, well, what got you here? And she had like 3 sessions with me at this point, and we were really starting to track into her, early childhood life. And she was like, I've never thought of these things that and I've been to years of therapy.
Mm.
And I'm like, I know, isn't that fucking sad? You've been to years of therapy, and like in 3 sessions, what we've been able to unlock, that's been hiding inside of you. And really the fact that you weren't really attuned to, you weren't listened to, and what is that doing now? Like how is that running havoc on your body? So I just want to say real quick for those of you that don't know, because we're coming together for the first time on this podcast, but Emily and I have been working together for a few years, working on some really cutting edge course classwork. And I want to give you each our background. So my background is in craniosacral therapy, prenatal and perinatal somatic psychology, which is a fancy word for group of words for I study how you come into form, right? And how your birth shapes everything about your life today. And I do a lot with energetic modalities that are steeped in spiritual wisdom. So my journey began with my own struggle as a mother. And I really wanted to unpack what the hell was happening to my body as a parent. So, this particular segment of our podcast, whenever I'm with Emily, because Emily's going to be a guest, quite frequently, and she's part of our team at the Flower of Life and one of our pioneer leading therapists. I just want you to know that that this audience that we're speaking to, even though we're talking a lot about parenting and what kids do to trigger us, this is for anybody. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to be somebody who's thinking about being a parent, but you do have to be somebody who's seeking to understand more about who you are and why you're
Mhm.
showing up the way you are. And hopefully that you're wanting to change a little, like you want to have more happiness, right? Like you want to have more ease. And if you are raising a parent, great. I mean, a kid. If you are raising a kid, we definitely want you to listen in to the podcast when Emily and I are together, because this is all about how you can show up as a more present parent and understand that your kid, what's going on in them, is also something that's going on inside of you. That's the missing piece that we like to talk about here, is that if you want to work on your children, and if you want to work on people that are in your environment, you got to start with yourself.
Mhm.
Right. So
Mhm.
that was my biggest thing, was my discovery when I went down that track was like, oh my God, I'm a mess and I need to clean this mess up and figure out why it is this way. And then I got so inspired. That's why I'm here. I want to help others. So tell us a little bit about you, Emily.
Awesome. Well, my background is in progressive education and parent education,
Okay.
and I've worked with children with behavioral challenges for many years. That's code for neurodivergence, usually, or trauma. Um, I've been studying student of consciousness for many years. I studied it in college. And I was also a misunderstood kid. So it started with me search a long time ago. I started going to therapy. I was, gosh, I think I was probably 8 the first time I went to family therapy, and then did some psychodynamic therapy as a 14-year-old. A lot of pressure on what is wrong with you, Emily? You're making bad choices. I was diagnosed dyslexic and ADHD and had issues with emotional regulation. I was a wild child in every sense of the term. And one of the major shift for me as kind of a lifelong seeker was the question, what happened to you, instead of what's wrong with you. So for decades in therapy, like I said, the conversation was, you're making bad choices, you need to stop doing that, stop making bad choices. And so inside of this understanding of trauma and what happens in your nervous system, what happens with stimuli, what happens with repressed or unprocessed experiences, for some of us can be chaotic, can be chaos, right? So learning about that, really obsessing about it, right? What it looks like, what fight, flight, freeze looks like, normalizing it, that this is human, right? We all go through this. We have distinct differences in our personalities and our experiences, but the reality is it's very human to navigate stress, right? You might disassociate, I might get angry, but it's all part of how the brain works to attempt to protect you and us and all of us. And
Yes.
that information was life changing for me. So I tried to push a lot of this work into a school that I founded in 2010. And I'm now in private practice, and have been for many years, and have the opportunity to work with people like Christiana, and then work just one-on-one with families. I love to go into homes and help people decode and understand what's going on for their child and for themselves, in these dynamic and very uncomfortable moments of stress that come up. So super happy to be working with you again, Christiana, and chatting with you on your podcast.
Thanks. And I know we have some demos in store today that we're going to put out there. It's um this journey is, it's really a map. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Like, if you can map the narrative and you don't have to relive the experience, you can actually unlock a lot that's going on in your body unconsciously. And that's the key of this journey, is figuring out the somatic piece, like what is going on in the body, and then linking it to the mind so that your mind can tell a coherent story versus what we kind of go over in our class, because it gets a little bit more neuroscience-y, if you will, to understand how the brain works. But it's really important, because if you don't understand that, it makes it difficult to do your map. And that's what we're doing with parents. That's what we're doing with individuals. And this is really what we're going to show you today, kind of give you a glimpse of, and then we're going to get in future podcasts, more specialized topics of like really down in the in the trenches with things. Like, I know our next one we're dealing with is like digital addiction, or should we even use the word addiction?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is that? And
Yeah.
what are the misnomers or the myths that we have around it? And we're here to demystify that for you. So that's going to be exciting. But maybe you can tell us just real quick, for anybody is learning skills on this and you pick up some really cool tidbits, you can go deeper with the course that we put together on our webpage. Emily, do you want to talk to them a little bit about what we teamed up to offer?
Sure, absolutely. So the Journey Backwards is our course, with a beautiful digital workbook that Christiana gets most of the credit for putting together. And it's a course for rewiring our story, and restoring connection first with ourselves. But of course, people show up looking to do work because there's some relationship breakdown in their lives, right? With their partner, with their children, with their family, what have you. So how to make sense of the struggle. It's a fully online program, and it consists of 4 self-paced modules, and it's designed to help you integrate and self-reflect, with loads of exercises and reflection, journal work, handouts. I mean, there's a lot going on in our course, so that you can deepen your understanding of how the how the past affects the present, and how our early experiences in life shape the way we view the world, and where we can actually expand, or how can we work with what happened, and how can we decode it, how can we make sense of it, right? So often clients will say things like, I never knew why I was this way, right? Or I didn't understand why I did that or did this or whatever it is. And so I really think what we've created, again, it's not just a puzzle piece, but it's like an expansion of how do these things work, right? We come through with wiring, we come through with our soul, we come through with so much, but then we have all these experiences and interactions with our close caregivers that actually shape and mold our brain. But those three areas really work together, right? What our DNA coming through, our personality or our soul, and then our conditioning or our experience. And so that's why I think we can make sense of siblings in families, right? They're all raised under the same roof, but they show up in different ways in the world, right?
Oh my gosh, I love how you put it in that simple three aspects of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because we're kind of like, think about like when we talk about a soul like dropping in, and you have this expansive consciousness that's here to individuate in a very unique way. And then it has to squeeze itself literally into the frequency that's dense and lower frequency than where it came, the dimension of high frequency, the universe, let's say. And you come into this physicality and your DNA has all this programming. Like, so how do you choose your eye color, your hair color? Like, did you choose that? Or was that just like some kind of mechanistic, if we want to say, almost, if you think about like machine, like choice, luck? I don't know. And then on top of it, you got to deal with everybody's baggage that's taking care of you, and you have no choice because you can't
And,
do anything for yourself.
babies and young children are vibing on their parents all day long.
Yes. It's a
They are.
frequency. And so you
They
have to
are
like
vibing
mold
out.
yourself, your unique soul, which we've talked about, right? Your, let's call it your higher self here, has to fit into all of this and make sense of it. And that's what we're here to do, is to really grow. That's why you say normalize all this, to take
Right.
it as an opportunity of growth. Even in the hardest of situations, right? Even in like destitution and poverty and violence, and like how can we really shed light onto that? So, oh my gosh, I love that you put it that way, Emily. And I love that you're already bringing up frequency. Tell us more about this paradigm shift that you and I vibe on. Like, what
Yeah,
the
that we're
hell
part
are
of.
we
Yeah.
shifting from?
Ooh. Yeah, sometimes it feels really simple, sometimes it feels complex to describe all of it, right? So
Yeah.
we've learned so much, but what Christiana's talking about and what she said in the intro of her podcast, and really the mission, right, of the Flower of Life Foundation, is to provide this education and tools that bring about shifts in consciousness. And so not just consciousness, but also the neuroscience. Like, there is neuroscience, like legit
In your
scientific
body.
research that we understand more now. Like,
Yeah.
it's really groundbreaking. It's overwhelming in a way, because it's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And also, it's just not the way that our culture has functioned, understanding how the brain works, how, experiences literally get mapped into your body. The brain and the body work together in these situations. And so it's this shift of understanding, information, education, to look at where we've been and where we want to be, and these goals that so many of us have, right? We want to raise children that most people say are happy, contribute, are kind. Most people have some goals they want for their kids, and how we get there, how we raise our kids to be intrinsically motivated contributors to society that are kind and loving and successful in all the things, is a lot different than how we thought we were supposed to do it. The
Yeah.
pull them up by their bootstraps thing, it actually causes more harm than support. and
Yeah.
and that might make sense to you right off the cuff, but it's like, oh my gosh, we have to rewire all these things so that we're
Yeah.
not stuck in these habitual, you know habits of projection and transference of our own stuff, right? If we're going to be disruptors, right, we're going to be part of this paradigm shift, we've got to have all the tools to kind of understand, wait, what is that? How do I deal with it? Oh no, what's coming up for me, right? It's a journey of putting all the pieces together. So the essence of conscious parenting, which is a deep integration with the nervous system, it helps us rewire and regulate so that we can show up and be present and connected and attuned and coherent in our relationships. And that journey, it's not a flip of a switch, it's ongoing, it's every day, it's practice, it's support, it's understanding, it's self-compassion. And then there's, ages and stages and the neurodevelopment that of course we want people to know too. And then there's the language, like, how do you do it? What do
Yeah.
you do when you mess up? You don't want to yell, but you do. Like, there's the practical stuff too. So this thing that we're building and asking you to join us on has all those pieces embedded. It's
Yeah.
not just theory, it's actual practice, it's actual science, it's all the pieces. And we live by it, right? We've come through this work, we're continuing on this work, and it's never about perfection, right? It's not about getting it all right. It's about the practice of attunement every day to yourself, to the people around you, and letting go of some of the egoic parenting or relationship ideals that are very seductive to most of us, right? It looks bright and shiny. It looks really cool. It looks really like, now it's kind of messy down there in the real world, right? It's not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about information. It's about standing with 2 feet on the ground and making sense of all the little pieces, one step at a time.
Well, I have a couple questions because
Okay.
you're using conscious parenting, right? And that's what
Mm-hmm.
we're saying, that this is different than like aware parenting or
or
mindful.
peaceful parenting or gentle parenting.
Yeah,
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 no, we
yeah.
have our
What
own
is that?
vibe.
Tell us that.
We
Like gentle
we have
parenting,
our own
mindful
vibe.
parenting, aware parenting. Like there's all
Oh
these
my
fucking
gosh, there's
parentings.
so
It's so
many.
confusing.
It is. I mean, this is our jam, right? Like, I'm a certified conscious parenting coach, right? So I have that little certification. But for me,
Woo
what is it to
woo,
me,
right?
right? To me, it's about waking up. To me, consciousness is about waking up. You can call it so many different things. It's about shadow work. It's about
Shadow work.
identifying those old roots. It's about questioning why I do the things that I do, understanding my story, putting together my trauma. Like, I had been to so much therapy by the time I was a parent, and I'd also been a teacher, classroom teacher of very young children. Like, I was so like, and then I started reflecting with my 3-year-old because I was getting so mad at her. And she
Yeah.
was 3. And what that's when this started for real for me,
Yeah.
was that I started asking myself why I was getting so mad. And honestly, it was a horrifying process in the beginning because I had so much pride and so much ego that was wrapped up in what I was doing and what I believed. And I actually took a lot of courage to be able to take a look in there because I'd already done a bunch of work, I thought. I'd already arrived. I'd already been healed in a lot of ways, I
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
right? And so um consciousness to me is that taking the responsibility. The onus is on us. It's not about the kid learning how to be a better kid. Like, I reject this old school, this is the paradigm for me, is that I'm looking at this fresh being, this fresh baby, as, honestly, I'm a little bit magical about babies. So I see the magic first, but also understanding the epigenetics, understanding that they are coming with things, but they're also so malleable and need so much protection, right? In that. And so understanding that I want to do my very best to be supportive of this little magical light, but I also want to balance what we know, again, from the neuroscience, how the brain develops, what's happening with a newborn baby, what's happening in utero, what's happening at 6 months, not that checklist you get on WebMD or something. the neurobiological development, which is a new conversation about the imprints, the needs, what's actually happening on a biological level, that's what we're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Is these real needs, like to be in community. Did you know that's a real neurobiological need? I didn't know that. And I was so excited when I found out, because I was like, that makes so much sense, because humans are biologically designed to be connected to. And there's actually a neurobiological need to be in community, that we are herd animals, that we need each
Well,
other.
and we explored that in the previous podcast. And if you people listening in on episode 2, Ovi and I are talking about it's an emotional universal need to have shared reality.
Yes.
And like when you come in as a baby and you're conscious and you have this soul and people are looking at you like you're not conscious and you don't have a soul, are you like just kind of got made and you don't really have a
Right.
brain yet? Like, woo,
Yeah,
that's a big
that's what I was,
ism
yeah,
right there.
that's what I was gonna say too. Like the old school kind of Victorian era
Yeah.
parenting that's still around. There was this idea that babies were born, maybe kind of evil, or like that they needed to
Yeah.
be forced
They're
to be
selfish.
good, that they're selfish, right? And so that may sound crazy, but at the same time, it's deeply embedded in our culture. Like I still see it all the time, where there's this undercurrent of, you're making a choice, kid,
Yeah.
to defy me, or to be
Yeah.
rude, or to, do children over time learn maladaptive strategies? Absolutely, that's true. There are manipulative people out there. That's absolutely true. There are people that are adults that have maladaptive strategies and all kinds of issues. That's right. But babies don't come that way. That's not true. That's not real. And if their behavior baffles you, what I really like to help people do is to take a pause and get their magnifying glasses out, because there's something else going on. It's not what it looks like on the surface.
Yeah. Well, I have a challenging question for you
Yeah. Yeah.
that's that is tied into this. And like for instance, yesterday I saw this client, she was coming in for craniosacral. She's a grandmother and she had her kids for the weekend. I mean her grandkids. And she's like, "Now I don't do my grandkids like my daughter does. And I have to just step back and put my hands up and let her do what she's doing because when they stay there, they have a difficult time at their house going to sleep. But at
Mm-hmm.
my house, I tell them now, grandma, it is bedtime for grandma and you're going to go to bed right now and I'm leaving. And I let them cry. But they only cry for like 3 minutes and then they're out. Now, what is that good, Emily, or is that bad? Like what's going on with what we're talking about with consciousness and letting a 2-year-old um go through that withdrawal, of connection and being in connection with a cared one with their parent away. And how is it that they go to sleep in this case so much easier for the grandparent than they do for mom and dad?
I mean, I would need more details, honestly, to be able to answer that really well. But I'd say kids have different relationships with different people. So you're going to see different behaviors with grandparents, with teachers at school, with a babysitter. Kids do adapt to different relationships. That's true. Your question is, why are they doing it so easily for grandma?
And she, according to her, they only the little girl that has the most problems, who's like 3, I think, she cried for a few minutes.
At bedtime?
And well, she left her. She said, "This is it. You're not
Go to
getting
bed.
up and this go to bed." And she shut the door and she said that she cried for a few minutes and then she didn't hear a peep. I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah, so
of course
there could
that's like,
be,
red flags for me because I'm like, "Oh,
yeah,
is she shut out? Is she like
it's a little
disassociated?"
cringy. Yeah, I mean, you could say that absolutely. In a best case scenario, she could have actually been exhausted and just gone to sleep really quickly. That's true, right? Worst case scenario, it could be disassociating. I would imagine she would have put up more of a fight though, if she hadn't experienced that before. So like when I work with families that have done some version of sleep training, um, I've heard all the stories where some people said it only lasted for a couple nights of crying and then they've never cried again. And then I've heard other stories and
True.
everything in between of it's like night after night after night of being left in the room and the door closed and just crying and crying and crying, right? And so there are different ways that babies and children adapt to stress and stimuli. In general, in our work, right, in the things that we're talking about, and we're looking at all behavior as communication. We're looking at neurobiological needs around safety and protection and being seen and supported and all the things. So I'm not a big fan of closing a child in a room and letting them cry ever, because in those early years, all those neurobiological needs are about connection, support, community, having needs, having caregivers
Having
respond
needs.
promptly, right? And so we risk a lot when we close the door on it. But I will tell you, I have worked with countless well meaning parents that have read books, that have consulted doctors and other experts that have told them to let the kid cry, like in real time. I have clients right now, fresh 2025, with a young child. They are educated, well meaning, lovely people who were instructed 6 months ago to close the door and lock it on their 2-year-old. They even bought a course. I won't say who it was, but they bought some sleep training course that was very expensive that said that. But can I tell you what I did, Christiana, when I went to their house for
I
the
would
first
love to
time?
know the
Because
magic.
they're having sleep issues, which is why they hired me. We've talked about everything at this point, right? Because I don't just do one thing. So I go over to the house and this kid, oh my gosh, the most precocious 3.5-year-old you've ever met. And she was like into me. So we became fast friends. And the first time I met her, this little girl was like willing to talk to me about sleep. And she was like, she straight up, she was like, I don't like to sleep. So at this point, right, the parents have her back in bed with them and nobody's getting any sleep and they're frustrated. But this little girl says, I hate sleep. And the parents both were like, what? They were so shocked she said that. And I said, why? Tell me why. And she said, it's boring. Right. That was the best thing she could come up with. I said, show me where you sleep. And so she showed me the parents' bedroom. And then she showed me her room. And there's a bed in there. She doesn't sleep in there. And she's kind of showing me around. And then right on the top of the door, there was a hook. And she goes, there's the hook. And the parents were like, had no idea that she even remembered. They don't talk about it. It's not a thing like on a
Mm.
daily basis ever. She's been sleeping with them for the last 9 months. But there was this hooky doodle. I don't even know what it's called. I'm sure people know what it is, but it's got a little stretchy cord, but it goes on the top of the door and you hook it outside the door so that when the kid tries to open the door, it opens a crack, but it won't, they can't get out.
Oh,
And
that
so
kind of
the
hook.
parents were like, couldn't believe they had like forgotten about it because it's at the very top of the door. And so, you know what they did later that week is they asked her, do you want to take that hook off the door? And she said, yes. And I want to throw it in the garbage. They did, which was so awesome. I was so excited about all of that. And we're still in process with it, but I'll tell you what has happened 2 months in is she was waking up, even though she was in their bed, she was waking up in a panic every night for the last nine
Wow.
months. And so now she's still in their bed because we're not at the phase of getting her out of their bed. Not yet, one step at a time. But at this point, she's sleeping better through the night because we took the pressure off. There was a tremendous amount of pressure. There had been some trauma that had not been articulated, even though they did that sleep thing with the hook just a couple nights, they said. It was a couple nights and then they gave up. But it left an imprint that we've been, messing around with to see how it landed on her, what she was holding on to, and how can we help her dissipate some of the anxiety that was sticking around. Because like I said, even in her parents' bed, she's waking up every night in a panic.
And of course, like, just how was she born?
Right.
Like
Right.
what interventions were used at her birth? Because, going back to your rage, me as a parent, there were 2 episodes that I shook my child, my first. I was exhausted, I was depleted, I was a single mother, I was living with my best friend. I also had Lyme's disease, and I hadn't slept in, I don't even know. And we had a C-section, and ever since the C-section, like there at that day of birth, like her rage, her inability to settle, like it was all there. I unpacked some of that in the previous episode, but that incontrollable need that she had to need me put me in rage when I was so already overwhelmed. And
Mm-hmm.
so her right to have needs violated my right to have autonomy and independence, because I had so little regulation already in my body and in my life from my story and my childhood, and so little attunement to my emotional needs, that when I had not practiced attuning to my emotional needs like we teach in this
Mm-hmm.
consciousness course. It's The inner child journey is all about understanding what is your emotional need in the moment that is causing the emotion, right? And how to meet it. It's really
Mm-hmm.
simple. And this
Mm-hmm.
is like, when you can figure out that map, and this is what we'll kind of, go into, um it makes me wonder. Like today I was driving down the road and I was thinking about how amazing my son is and how little difficulty we have in his behaviors. Now, we have behavior issues, don't get me wrong, like we have, but compared to what my daughter has gone through in her life, my first child, and how I evolved, he has literally marinated and more in the frequency of love and incoherence than my daughter did. And you can see it, you can see it. And so I was driving down the road, and as I'm thinking this, okay, I'm watching this man on the side of the street, and he looked, I don't know if he was homeless, but he's definitely in a part of the neighborhood in my hometown that, it's lower income housing. And he's there at a park, and he just throws his coffee cup in the middle of the grass, and you could tell he was just like, and he just like tossed off this litter, and he was just like walking across the street, and you could just see in his vibration, like in his frequency, that he's so cut off, from the frequency of love. And the first thing that went through my head was, it's kind of like repulsive, like I want to be repulsed by a human being that's so self-centered, right? I'm like, you just fucking littered, man. Like, pick up your trash. And
Mm-hmm.
then to see somebody so just not radiant, not in joy, right? Repulses me. And then immediately I was like, oh, okay, that's what it is that repulses me. Inside of myself is the idea of not being seen,
Mm-hmm.
not being loved, not being in connection. Because I already know from my training, this guy had a childhood that was probably full of violence, probably full of shame. I mean, I go into that part of the neighborhood, and I see how they talk to each other and how they
Mm-hmm.
parent. And it's just like, ooh, it's because they never got modeled that themselves. And so
Mhm.
this is deep buried in his body, right?
Mhm.
So this is what we're talking about. This is the difference, is that we have to start with ourselves. We have,
Mhm.
and then how do we radiate that vibration out to our environment, right? So maybe, Emily, this is where you can just go, we want to just go through a little process, I think, of what the inner child journey is and what it is that, we're going to be modeling to people in our drop-in classes, because we'll have a live drop-in classes for people. And of course, if you take the course yourself, there's prompts for you to do this, but going over a little bit of what the inner child journey looks like, just from like big picture, like the five.
Okay. Say that again, the 5 steps.
Yes.
Okay. So, like we said already,
And it's kind of like traditional family therapy, like versus.
right. So the difference here, so much of the work we do with children is really unpacking the narratives of the parent.
Right.
Um, and it's not just the child. People get stuck here. So I would say a good portion of folks that call me with the narrative that their kid has a problem and they want me to help them or help their kid,
Yeah.
right? And so when I start to pivot towards the parent, I will tell you a big portion of folks feel defensive right off the bat. And I think that the reason why is because we all are doing our level best. We
Yes.
we
God.
do the level best. We
I
do
mean, have you looked
everything
out
we
at the world
can.
right now? Like,
Yeah, we all feel defensive, right? Because our children are a reflection of us. We know that.
yeah.
It's embarrassing, it's humiliating, it's enraging for many of us when our children are struggling or having a hard time. It's deeply part of how we feel about ourselves, right? And so we do want to look at what's going on for the parent as the first piece here. And that's drastically different from other therapeutic approaches or supports out there where it is kid focused or there's star charts or like all kinds of incentivizing things to get kids to behave well. Traditional family therapy will focus on the child's behavior. So instead of asking what's wrong with my child, we want to ask what's happening within me that's being reflected in my child, right? Or because children are so deeply attuned, I mean, they vibe out on us, like no joke. They channel, they're super attuned and connected. It doesn't matter what kind of family you have. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Kids, young children, that's why I think they're magic. I mean, I've worked with children for more than 2 decades, 2.5 decades, because they're wild. They vibe out. They carry your stuff and it spills out of them in their language sometimes or their energetic field. Like there's so much going on. And so because they're so deeply attuned, because they're in connection with our nervous systems, they're they will hold some of our unprocessed wounds. They may also have their own, and the emotional patterns. Like people will say things to me all the time, like my daughter reminds me of my mother, things like that, where they can feel like they can see imprints or, and then it terrifies them because they're like, I don't want to do anything like my mom. And I think that's really interesting too, because in a way it's a projection when we say things like that. It's all about us, right? Wanting to be different. And it's also not enough. Like, oh, there's big things to put together and separate in terms of this stuff. So nervous systems, unprocessed wounds, emotional patterns, their behavior is often mirroring what's unresolved in us. When parents are caregivers, when we do our own inner work, is when we're able to see it. Like it opens up a whole new world. And I'm just going to highlight the courage it takes to kind of do this too. Again, I had a client recently who spent some time with them and the kid. And the little girl has a lot of behavioral stuff going on, and literally like vibrating and bouncing off the walls. And at one point, I realized she was channeling her dad in many ways, and they have a lot of rupture in their relationship. And I asked the dad, what do you think about my assessment that your kid might be a lot like you? Do you think that you behaved in these ways? And the wife was like, yes, absolutely. She's like nodding her head. But the dad was very resistant. He was like, no. And what I could see after that point, as I continued to work with them, was how unsafe it was for him to be vulnerable, to take a look in his own history, because when he was bouncing off the walls like her, he was beat and isolated. There was no room to do any of that. And it's like, oh my gosh, now he's got this firecracker for a kid, just like literally bouncing. She bounces down the hallway on the couch, and it's provoking to him. And I also think there's a deeper piece there for him too, but it evokes shame. And so she keeps doing it. She like keeps provoking him to be like, hey, you see me now? You see me now? You see me now? And he's like, he's not ready. He's not ready, which makes so much sense, because it's really intense to do this pivot, right? Like, I don't say to any of my clients, you better listen to what I'm saying and believe me right now and do what I say. Like, it takes people some time to make sense of this stuff. It's intense. It really shifts how you think about the world and where you've been and what you're doing and how we're supposed to be taking care of this. So,
Well, it's, I have a client like that too. And I have a number of clients like that, when the dads, especially, have grown up with a lot of pressure. They grow up in, maybe let's just use a highfalutin, family, or a well-to-do family. There's a lot of pressure to go through the education system that your parents went through, and to have the job that's going to carry the family line. And, you're a junior or the third or the fourth, that kind of mentality. And it's not at all about, well, what is your soul? Who are you? What is this essence of you? How, there's none of that.
right.
And so sometimes we deal with this all the time, those people who are highly successful and they're doing really well, they're not doing anything wrong. So why are they having these problems with their kid? Why is their kid having, difficulty sleeping or settling? Because they can't settle. They can't settle because they weren't allowed to settle. That wasn't safe. And they can't choose a different way of thinking because they were so ingrained to think a certain way. So yeah, it does take a lot of courage. And this is the perfect time to just insert the video for us to do a little demo. You and I do the demo of what the inner child journey is. It's 5 steps. And what we do and what we're going to unpack on this podcast in many different ways is, first, how to even touch in with what's happening inside of your body. Like when there's a situation, we go through the situation, a story, whatever it is that's happening that's up for you today, a challenge, and we're like, okay, notice your body. And then if we just go there, that takes a lot of practice for some people, and understanding what is actually happening in the body. And there's a lot of neuroscience that we unpack there. And then after we do that, what is listening of the body, then we have to ask the right questions, right? Like so we have to like figure out the need, and we have a needs list. Like, we actually have a list that we go on, and we'll, we have that in our class that you can purchase, and maybe I'll even throw it up in the class notes, like the link for the needs list, because it's free. It's available online. It's awesome. And once we figure out the need that's being triggered or hasn't been met, then we have to go back further. Like, when did this happen to me before? Or when does this happen to me? Like, when this need pops up. So that's the mapping. And I don't want to overwhelm too many people with the next two steps, but that's the whole point of what we're doing here, is bridging awareness so that we can take action for ourselves. And yeah, like, I know it's been a long time since you and I recorded this little video of you and I doing the inner child journey, but it's the great place to insert it here now, and I will. And we can see everybody on the flip side.
Awesome.
Okay, let me just pause it real quick. Okay, welcome back. We hope you like the video. And there's so much more to unpack here. Like we said, next time we're going to get together and really talk about well, digital addiction and like what that is. And now that you've seen the inner child journey, how we can take that topic and really explore the essences of neuroscience and mapping and all the things that we just did in the video. So we're excited, and we'll stay tuned for more. Emily, anything you want to say before you head out?
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.